Welcome, my name is Tracy Zhu. I'm an alum of the Multicultural Fellowship and your moderator for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us today to learn about the San Francisco Foundation's Multicultural Fellowship Program, and if it is something that you'd be interested in applying for. This webinar is being recorded. Today, you'll hear from current fellows and alumni about their fellowship experience, learn more about what you might expect in your experience, and have the opportunity to have your questions answered. Logistical information, such as the application information, deadlines, and etc., are available on the San Francisco Foundation web pages. Please check that out and use this time to check out the content and ask any additional questions that might not be answered by these pages. The sff.org/fellowship page is about the Multicultural Fellowship Program, and the sff.org/careers page has detailed job description with that detailed logistical information. Be sure to check out both. Please also remember that the fellowship experiences changes from cohort to cohort, so please be open to change and the possibilities as you listen to the experience of our current fellows. A note, as I mentioned earlier, we're recording this webinar and we'll be doing screenshots, so if you would not like to be in the recording or in the screenshot pictures, feel free to keep your camera off. Also, if you have questions throughout this info session, please type your questions in the chat, and my fellow alum, JC, will be gathering questions, summarizing similar questions, and reading them out loud. And of course, use the reaction buttons along the way to stay engaged. To start off, we're going to do a few introductions. First, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Tracy Zhu. I was part of the fellowship from 2014 to 2016, and I'm currently the Social Impact Partnership Manager at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, a city department of San Francisco.
Hi, everybody. I'm Vanessa Camarena Arredondo. I was in the fellowship from 2006 to 2008. I'm now a program officer at Akanadi Foundation, which is a family foundation based in Oakland that focuses on the decriminalization of youth of color. Welcome. I'll pass it to JC.
I am still muted. Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's so great to see so many folks on this webinar. I'm JC DeVera. I go by he, him, his pronouns. I was a Power Fellow from 2017 through 2019, and I'm currently an Associate Director at Hirsch Philanthropy Partners here in the Bay Area, which is a philanthropic consulting firm that advises high net worth individuals, families, and foundations. And Tracy, Vanessa, and I are all on the steering committee of the Multicultural Fellowship Alumni Network, which was created to support the alumni of this fellowship through networking programs and financial resources.
Thank you, JC and Vanessa, and thank you for supporting the webinar today. It's a pleasure serving on the steering committee with you all. The Multicultural Fellowship Program has a vibrant community of over 100 alumni who have benefited from their participation and welcomes 4 fellows every 2 years. The fellowship program was established over 30 years ago and boasts alumni who are now organizers, nonprofit leaders, small business owners, educators, elected officials, and philanthropic leaders, including San Francisco Foundation's current CEO, Fred Blackwell. The fellowship program is for leaders of color who want to experientially learn about how a community foundation can be leveraged for a more inclusive and equitable Bay Area. It's for people who are knowledgeable of the Bay Area nonprofit landscape and new to the philanthropic sector. The fellowship is also for people who are motivated to be in a growth mindset, learn about challenges and opportunities at the San Francisco Foundation and in philanthropy as a sector, who want to grow personal and professional awareness and develop their own toolkit on how to navigate these spaces, and really want to expose themselves to new perspectives and strategies. Lastly, this is for people who really want to do all of this in an intimate learning cohort and with the support of San Francisco Foundation staff, network, and alumni. Now I'm going to invite the 4 current fellows to briefly introduce themselves. And we're going to go alphabetical order. So I'm going to invite Amy to go first.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that, having some technical issues. My name's Amy. I'm Amy Maria Silva. I use she, her pronouns. A little bit of background about me. I'm from here in the Bay Area, from South Hayward. And I went to school in UC Santa Barbara. It was a big culture shock for me. And actually the first of many culture shocks, I think, as I left my life in Hayward. I was coming from a working class neighborhood of mostly people of color. It was a very different experience for me. Some of my more relevant and recent positions include some time doing diversity and inclusion consulting. Before that, I managed the research department at a policy advocacy nonprofit, which are both based here in the Bay Area. I've more or less always been focused on racial equity throughout the various jobs I've held. I think I can say the reasons that I have moved on from each of these positions is because I really didn't feel an authentic sense of commitment to racial justice at any of the organizations that I was working at. So when I came to the fellowship when it came to considering applying for the fellowship, I was really excited. I was excited about the work that San Francisco Foundation was doing. I felt like they were taking a really bold stance on doing racial equity work that I hadn't seen before. A driving career throughout my career so far has really been like, how can we prove that we're doing what we say we're doing? If it's policy advocacy, are the policies that are being implemented, are they implemented in a way that's really going to impact the targeted audiences? If we're diversifying tech companies, are we really addressing culture change that needs to happen to make these institutions inclusive spaces? And so I felt like San Francisco Foundation was a place that was taking these questions seriously, or at least willing to engage in the hard work of trying to answer them. So that's kind of how I came about to apply for the fellowship. I'm currently the Strategic Learning and Evaluation Fellow. I think another part that I want to mention is that I really needed a supportive cohort around me. I needed community. I was at a place where I was getting really jaded about the work. I felt like change couldn't happen unless, we got to the Mad Max dystopian war zone area. And I don't think at the time I was even really excited about being in such a small cohort, but it's honestly been one of the most empowering parts of the whole experience. They're honestly my dream team. And even though we're really sad that the fellowship is ending and we're all going on our different paths, we're also really excited to continue being in community with each other and discovering the ways we get to work together in the future. So it's a little about me. I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Gracia.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Grecia Mana Ayon. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Place Fellow. And to say a little bit about myself, I'm from North Hollywood in the LA area. And I went to school up here. What's the other question? My background is in affordable housing. So that is my personal and my professional drive. So affordable housing and community development. And a lot comes with that, but I'll keep it there for the introduction. I've worked directly with residents. I've worked in TA, being a technical assistance provider. So I've done different things as it relates to that. And now I continue to work on place-based initiatives. I applied to this fellowship because I hadn't really been or experienced a place where so much investment and resources was being poured into young leaders of color. As you know, those aren't programs that are abundant, unfortunately. So it seemed like a really good opportunity. And I also was ready to move to an organization where race was openly discussed. So it wasn't just like, it wasn't something that folks were kind of talking about. It wasn't something that was being swept under. It was front and center and at the foundation of everything we do. So that's why I'm here. So I will pass it to Heywan.
Hi, everybody. My name is Heywan Asfal. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm the fellow for the People Pathway. So a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Los Angeles as a child of two immigrant parents, a Korean mother and Ethiopian father. And my experience growing up as a Blasian kid in LA during the 90s, especially after the LA uprisings, is really what shaped my understanding of racism, multi-generational organizing, or injustice, and like my commitment, really my commitment to freedom. And so my roots have been in youth-centered multi-generational organizing that's focused on really ending the criminalization of Black and Brown youth, and working to shift, not just culture and policies, but our imaginations from one that centers police and prisons and punishment as justice and the solutions for our community, to really centering social welfare and social justice. So, after I spent about 8 years doing as a community organizer, and after that, spent about 1.5 years in Ethiopia, where my family's from, to really kind of deepen my relationships and like my cultural movement work there. And I really feel like my community organizing work and time in Ethiopia made one thing really, really clear to me, which is the importance of talking about trauma and our mental health, and that we need to really prioritize our wellness for the next generation. And for me, that looks like centering healing justice in literally every single thing that I do. And, I feel like as people of color, all of these kind of these harmful, violent systems that we're up against have really made us believe that our health and well-being is not of value. I don't know how many, this is a call of people of color, so I'm sure we've all experienced like some form of, I'll speak for myself, I don't want to assume, but just that that mental health is not a real thing, and that our services are kind of apolitical, and that's how I was trained as a social worker. So when I really wanted to deepen my work around trauma, conflict, and struggle, I moved up to the Bay and went to Cal to kind of deepen my own knowledge and skills around mental health. And I studied community mental health at Cal, and that's how I got introduced to the fellowship program. And when I first heard about it, I was like, I'm not trying to be in philanthropy. Like, that's not my field. A lot of distrust stuff, especially from being on the grantee side for so long. And it was really looking through the application and feeling like, oh, wow, this is a dedicated leadership program. And I applied to the fellowship because I was excited to learn and build with like-minded people of color. I've never been in all POC learning space where like so many, like Grecia said, so many people and resources and mentorship being poured into me for the sole purpose of developing my leadership and impact. I always joke when I got in, I was like, wow, this is how white people must feel, where the whole like world and classrooms and everything is centered around like your well-being and growth. And it's just been really powerful. And I think the other reason too is really to cultivate this lens around healing justice work and philanthropy, because it is just so deeply underfunded. And so a lot of what I have done and how I have brought myself into this work is really trying to bridge ground up grassroots community organizing and mental health, like the intersections of those two things, that you cannot separate them. Yeah, I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited for another dope cohort of people of color to access this incredible opportunity.
Right, thanks, Haywan. Thanks, everyone, up to this point. Echoing a lot of points of my fellows. My name is Josh Lee. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Multicultural Fellow for the Power Pathway. I come to this work by way of youth organizing in my hometown of Oakland, and really being the primary strategy of how I've engaged in transforming communities through following the minds and leadership of young people. And some of the groups I used to work with are Youth Together, and most recently I was the former director of APAL, building Asian Pacific Islander community power. I also went to UCSC, shouts out to APAL, and have a master's in higher education from University of Michigan. And so with that, I was a former grantee of my current pathway, and also the Rapid Response Fund through my role at APAL. And that played the biggest role in my deciding to apply ultimately to this fellowship. And just knowing that the staff here and the role that Rapid Response Fund plays in the movement as far as resourcing goes were aligned with the work I was trying to move into. The other for real reason for my transition into this type of work was becoming a parent of a young person and wanting to make a shift where I could still play a really active role in supporting movement work, but maybe it was a little different in terms of the needs of my family. And I think one thing I will share about, even though I was a leader in the field and a director even, my organization was really a small grassroots group, and it felt like I needed something like this fellowship to make a jump into working in larger institutions. It did not feel to me that I would be competitive for some of the other roles out there without having something like this along the way, which is just to say that, you know, I think for folks that come from grassroots movement work, it can be a big shift, and it was really important to have these 2 years to connect with other like-minded folks, unpack everything we were experiencing and learning, and that we have up to this point, and think about what kind of role we want to play in shifting philanthropy or wherever we want to end up in order to make sure that these systems make more sense and are accountable and transparent to our communities in the work. So I'll leave it there, and thanks so much. Really good to see this many faces. Oh, that's my timer. Perfect.
Right on the buzzer. Thanks so much, you four. You definitely opened up this conversation and also set the tone for the purpose of this webinar to be really conversational, to share stories and share perspectives and experiences. And so for those who just joined us, I just wanted to share that the agenda for today was to do some introductions. I'm going to pose a couple of questions and then turn it over to you all to ask questions of our fellows to learn more about the fellowship experience. And so our next question is, as fellows, each of you worked on a specific team. Could you please describe your team so folks have a better understanding of the team's role, how the team functions, and what you work on? Again, I'll turn it over to me.
Thanks, Tracy. So strategic learning and evaluation. The way I think of it is that we basically are ensuring that the foundation does exactly what they said that they were going to do. The strategic learning and evaluation team is kind of new to the foundation. I think it's also still really finding the most impactful way to be part of the organization. So really there's no shortage of work to be done. There's such a variety of work to be done also within our group. A really big part of the work during my time here has been on the technical side, getting new grant systems up and running, really exploring the reporting function, researching other tools that we want that can give us really what we need, and also integrating those new technologies into our work systems. The other side of the work has been a lot of change management, and especially around getting used to being a learning organization. I really took the term strategic learning and ran with it. To me, strategic learning includes learning from our own grant making. It also includes learning from our own mistakes and experiences, and learning from each other. So one of the really exciting projects that I've been working on over the last 2 years has been coordinating our monthly learning series. I'm just in such a wonderfully impactful place where I get to shape these sessions where we invite folks like Manuel Pastor, Angela Blackwell, Derica Blackman. We invite them to come, and we have this monthly speaking series, and it's really been enlightening to think about, how do we shape this session to be responsive to our organization's needs, where we are in our journey. What do we need to be able to incorporate these learnings into our day-to-day lives and really embody these learnings? So that's been really one of the most exciting projects for me. We do have a new director of strategic learning and evaluation. Her name is Suki. She just started earlier this month, and it's been very exciting getting to know her and her work style. It's just an exciting time for the team because under a new director, the team is inevitably going to be different. They get to reshape themselves and find a new identity. And then they'll have another fellow coming on board this summer, and there'll just be so much space to really create your own experience. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that, and I will pass it to Grecia again.
Thanks, Amy. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm on the PLACE pathway. So recently, the San Francisco Foundation has started to engage foundation-wide on housing work, but our team is the rooted and thriving communities piece of our foundation-wide goals. So the distinction with what our team does is that we do really neighborhood and hyper-local work. So that could mean, to go a little bit more broadly than that, we focus on more than just bricks and mortar. So not just like the units. It's very much like community development and like what makes a home a home. So we also focus a lot on anti-displacement, renters' right, like different, like the protection, preservation, production. And we also have this initiative, the HOPE SF initiative, which is the revitalization of public housing in District 10 of San Francisco. And so I do a lot of work on this initiative, and that's a really good example of where we go beyond the unit. So it's a partnership. The HOPE SF partnership is made up of the foundation, the City of San Francisco, and Enterprise Community Partners, which is an affordable housing nonprofit intermediary. And a lot of what we do is focused around like education, economic mobility, health. It's just like all the things that we know are connected to housing and that are important for people. It's a really holistic approach. And so it's kind of an interesting structure that we have with the initiative within the PLACE pathway. It's a little bit of like a team within a team. But as I mentioned, even though the foundation does housing work widely, the PLACE team is very neighborhood and local focused. So everyone's work is typically focused on a neighborhood or a specific city. And make sure I'm not missing anything else. I think I'll leave it there. So I will pass it to Heywan.
Cool. So as I shared, I'm part of the People Pathway. Our work really believes in an inclusive economy where one, communities of color are not criminalized and then have empowered jobs and their basic human rights met, right? Like housing and land, food, water. And we center economic well-being through strategies that are focused on decriminalizing poverty, building positive school climate and worker power, and increasing community wealth, right, through more public and collective ownership of land and resources. Some of my big projects I've been managing some really cool projects. I think that's something that's just in terms of the makeup of our team. And this has been my experience. My supervisor, who will also be the next fellow supervisor, Jadon Terry Kuhn, really like leaned into this piece of the fellowship around experiential learning. So my first project was a research project that brought together multiple stakeholders from public agencies and labor and community-based organizations to do a deep dive research project on strengthening project labor agreements in the Bay, right? So to make sure, you know, as the Bay Area is booming construction-wise, economically, who is accessing these jobs. And so it was really creating a table of folks that are building alignment and partnership in different sectors to strengthen our PLAs in the Bay. And it was not my field. My background experience has been in youth organizing. So labor is not, it was just new to me, and I learned a lot. A lot of it was managing folks, managing relationships, making sure the work was moving, and that has been a lot of my role in a lot of different projects. I've been holding another project is convening a group of worker rights organizations who are really just trying to build relationships and alignment to strengthen worker organizing in the Bay across the region. And I think one of the great things about being in the fellowship too is that there's a lot of space to create projects. And so if something's not happening in the foundation, I love like our cohort, because it's like, okay, if it's not happening there, how do we transform and like do our own thing here or create spaces outside of what already exists? And so part of that has looked like running an API affinity group during lunch with Josh, with our team participating in different learning togethers and pushing different curriculum and conversations that folks like, that are new to folks or that are not present in the room. Real fast, the lessons learned since I've come to the team is just really I'll just talk about my team actually, because I feel like I'm out of time, but the qualities of my team is like, we are a team of criers. Every meeting, we are we really practice like deep and uncomfortable vulnerability. And a lot of that looks like really, how do we practice integrity so that we are not compartmentalizing. When we come into work, a lot of ourselves we have to leave outside. And I feel like our team really practices like, my work is not connected to or just attached to my job title or an institution. It is connected to my values. And so we really try to live into that. And I will pass it to Josh.
All right, thanks. So I'm a part of the Power Pathway, which is also formerly known as the Nurturing Equity Movements pathway. And to me, I view it as like this collaborative glue pathway that supports the place and people teams and funding movement work. And so our pathway really promotes power building as a funding strategy for BIPOC-led youth and intergenerational organizing, stuff around immigrant rights, housing, different forms of policy change, and another part of our toolkit as the Power Pathway is the Rapid Response Fund for movement building, which was started by a former fellow 4 years ago by Jasmine Segura. And the Rapid Response Fund is a really unique and a necessary tool for supporting groups like the ones I was a part of prior to joining the foundation, to increase the capacity of organizations to respond to challenges and attacks facing our communities. I view it almost as like an emergency fund, but that's set up for power building in particular. And it definitely was a big draw, like I mentioned in my intro, for wanting to be a part of this. There are not many other rapid response funds currently, open ones for folks to apply to throughout the Bay Area. And I think in this era, it's a really important tool for funding, especially small grassroots organizations. And as the Power Team as a Power Team Multicultural Fellow, there's a lot of opportunity to help guide the Rapid Response Fund. And actually every fellow during the first 6 months of your fellowship will be a part of the Rapid Response Fund Review Committee as well. So that's direct experience with grant making, reviewing, etc. And that was my other timer. And I'm done.
Okay,
if there's something, yeah. Oh, if there's something you wanted to say, Josh, you can take a couple more minutes because we're doing good on time.
Okay, that's good to know. No, that was legit the end. Thank you.
Yeah, so I was actually going to chime in to add to my piece, because even though I was very well prepped for this webinar, it seems that I still managed to not fully answer the question that I was supposed to answer, so my apologies. So I spoke very much to like what the work is that we do, but I also want to speak towards a little bit more about like what it means to be on the team and the different projects that I've done. So the Place Pathway, there is, I would say, a lot of like independent, self-initiated type of work, which depending on like what your style is, some people really might like that. As a Place Fellow, you have a lot of freedom to create your own scope of work with some guidance, but it really is up to your initiative. So I would say if you're someone, you know, if this is the role, if you're considering this role, I would say a fellow that has a lot of initiative, is bold, would be a really good fit. And I would also encourage that if you came to this pathway, to stand really firm in your values. And I think that you'll find that you'll be well respected for that. There is a sense that people on the team have a really deep commitment to social justice and racial equity. It's not a topic that anyone shies away from to discuss, not throughout the foundation, but it really is something that comes up. It's always there because it's always relevant, right? One of the things, as I mentioned, I also work on the Hope SF initiative. So my time on this pathway has been a little interesting because the place team has been in like a period of transition for quite a while. Our director left, I think, almost a year ago, and then we were hit with COVID. So there hasn't been a permanent replacement, but one is coming in the next like month or so. So who you report to, what the team culture or the priorities may shift depending on that. I'm happy to talk about it more, and I'll put my email in the chat. But it is important to, so I was working a lot on this Hope SF initiative, but the next fellow may find that their work, it looks a little different when they come. And so I'm caveating that because a lot of the work that I do is focused on Hope SF. One of the projects that I did is I created a fund that is meant to uplift. We work really closely with residents of 4 public housing developments in San Francisco. And I wanted there to be a method in which they could apply for funding for it, because there's a lot happening, a lot of resident-led projects. And so I wanted it to be some sort of avenue where if you didn't actually just know someone at the foundation, had their email or their phone number, that you had an avenue to apply for funds. So that was something that I spearheaded. I brought along my colleagues and is launching, and I'm really excited about it. And I also do a lot of cross-departmental type of collaboration. So for example, I sit on the Contra Costa cross-departmental committee. And so that's different priorities that make up different departments that sit on the committee. So I've had the opportunity to do some place work and also a good amount outside of the place pathway. So you're not going to be just like stuck in like one path. There's opportunity for other work. So I think I will leave it there. Thank you for letting me go again, hosts and moderators.
Thank you. You really put a lot of color and texture to the experience that people won't be able to read about on the website. So really appreciate you going around the second time around, Caricia. So this last question before I open up to audience questions is for 2 fellows. Love to invite 2 fellows to provide some advice on who should be applying to this program. It's also helpful to know who should not be applying to this program. And specifically, what is important for folks to know about the program and the experience that you haven't yet shared? Hey, why not?
For me.
Yep, I'll ask
you. You can go ahead. I'll go after. Oh, go me?
Oh, I'm sorry. Either one.
Just go, Josh.
All right. Yeah, I think it's really, I don't think there's any one type of person to apply to this fellowship. I think it's really open. We have great leadership in terms of our fellowship program officer, Claudia Paredes, who is not here today because she recently had a young one as well. And so we're just wanted to uplift her and bring her into this space and her family. And she's really helped guide and shape our experience. And so that also means that coming with a wide set of experiences is super welcome. I think for me, the one thing I want to lift up is that this fellowship is really for anyone looking to shift the role you're currently playing in social justice work to a possible new one, in the same way that I described in my intro, sort of that stepping stone or bridge along the way, because fellows really get the opportunity to network and meet so many leaders in different fields, not just in philanthropy. And I think one thing is figuring out what role you want to play in a medium to larger institution. At least for me, as I described, I'm not familiar with working in like large institutions, and it's there is a professionalized culture in these types of institutions, and I think that this helps to find a space with aligned folks to navigate that and figure out what makes sense for you if you're thinking about doing sort of bigger, quote unquote, bigger system change work and still wanting to be connected to the ground. I think the last thing I'll say is just that this work is really, wait, I forgot for a second. This work is really for this work. Okay, I got it. We need folks from the ground and from the field in this work. There are many decisions that myself and my fellows have been, colleagues have been involved in that I think if we weren't here would have went a very different way. And at the same time, that's not to say that fellows at this institution have a bunch of power, formal decision-making power. But I think there is a layer where absolutely we need more folks from the ground and grassroots works and different areas of the movement to play a role in systems change at this level.
Cool. I'm going to add, by just talking about this moment that we're living in, this is the time, especially 2021, is the time to shake things all the way up and do things we've never done before. You know, as someone that grew up in organizing a lot of my political ed and training, and when the uprising would happen and transformation was on the, you know, we were on the brink of change, I had this idea that it would be explosive, which it has been. But I think I've had this idea that it would get violent in a different way. And what I mean by that is, I feel like 2020 was a lot of people taking up space and power, and their positional power, their social capital, to really change the way we do things and think about things and talk about things. And so I would say this fellowship is for people that really want to change things in a real way, are willing to take risks, are willing to think outside of the box. We are in these rooms to change the rules. And I talk a lot about, you know, just the way people of color have been told all these different ways that we can improve our lives. If we go, if we make money, if we go to college, if we, you know, just be successful in your job, etc. And I always bring up Obama because I feel like the Obama administration was really a turning point where it's like we literally checked off every single box that they told us of what to do to make our lives better, right? And then when I saw Trump come into office, I was like, wow, you can really be president, do whatever you want. You know what I mean? Like, so all these rules and all these ways that we make excuses as to why we don't break the rules or why we have to follow the things that exist, because all of the rules are imaginary. And we're in a moment where how are we redefining them, reshaping them so that they serve all of us and that we're co-creating that world together, right? I feel like philanthropy functions in a silo, right? There's this idea that people on the ground and organizers do this work. And I feel like in philanthropy, there's a romanticization of the movement in ways where like that the change happens down there and we facilitate it up here. And that's not true. And so like, how do we actually, instead of, my colleague Rob said this in a meeting the other day, we're often talking about how do we get out of the way for grantees versus like, how do we partner with folks to help clear the road for all the bullshit that they're gonna be up against, right? And so I would say this fellowship is for people who are really trying to challenge power, move us to get in the right relationship with it. People who embody what they say, right? Embodied leadership. It's really easy to talk about the things we care about. Living into them is much harder. And this fellowship gives you a container to do that. And I would say this fellowship is not for people that think philanthropy is the solution to our problems. People need resources and funds now. Philanthropy in this moment is a harm reduction tool. So I think that's important to lead with. We want to make sure that we are changing the field, and for myself, eventually it not existing anymore. So yeah, I'll just leave it there. So we have time for more questions.
Thank you so much. And as I prepped JC to get ready to facilitate the questions, I just did want to also acknowledge that there's a question very specifically on, in the job description, asks that candidates have a minimum of 5 years and maximum of 7 years of progressively responsible work experience in the public or nonprofit sectors. This really, just wanted to answer that question. Is that a hard line? Is there flexibility in that? Really, that requirement speaks to the intent of the program for mid-career professionals. and it's up to the applicants to make the case on why this fellowship is for them at this point in the career and why you want to be in philanthropy at this point in your career. And so thank you to both Josh and Heywan for, and then again, adding color and kind of texture to that. So I'm going to pass it over to JC.
All right, thank you. And thank you everyone for submitting many great questions. I know we only have about 17 minutes left, so sadly we won't get to all of them, but I believe the fellows are also making themselves available to answer any questions, and they'll be leaving their email addresses. But we really want to get to some of the really meaty ones. You'll be able to find a lot of the answers to the logistical questions on the website. So check out those links there. But I'm just going to launch into some of these very meaty questions that the fellows and even some of the alum will really be able to illuminate more. The first that I want to ask is, there was a question around how important is it for applicants to have a sound understanding of the nonprofit landscape in the Bay Area? And I'll pose that to one of the fellows if you want to take that. Maybe to Heywan, as someone that was coming from LA.
So a lot of my organizing work in LA was connected to organizing work in the Bay Area, specifically folks doing restorative justice work like Black Organizing Project and policing work. It's very helpful to know the landscape, like even like, and have like relationships. I don't think it's a requirement, but it's very helpful to know what's happening in the region. And maybe Josh could speak to that because you also come from organizing and you from this land.
Yeah, I would agree, but I also know no other way. Just being, you know, here in the Bay forever probably. But yeah, I think just in general, an understanding of, you know, even just the nonprofit industrial complex in terms of how you want to use philanthropy, as Heywan was referencing, to you know, to change and understand it as a tool, but not the solution. I think having an understanding of the dynamics and power of nonprofits and foundations will definitely be useful. And you will get lots of opportunity if you're not from this area to learn. You know, like I said, I'm like deep in Oakland, but I even still have, you know, Central or West Contra Costa or East Contra Costa to learn more about, and got a lot of more exposure to Bay Area regional work through being here that I didn't have previously.
Great, thanks Josh. The next question I'll pose to one alum, so either Tracy or Vanessa if you want to take this, and also to one of the current fellows. What would you say is one of your most influential takeaways from your time as a fellow, and how do you feel it will impact your work and your own professional journey moving forward? So, okay, Vanessa will take it.
Sure. Okay, I'm trying to think of, well, I think what was really helpful was to kind of understand how city, counties, the state work with foundations, and like how they hover together, hopefully with community to make decisions that kind of like impact our communities, right? And I think that being able to sit and learn alongside these leaders, these kind of like institutions of power, and as some of the fellows say, you know, think about what are ways that we hold our systems accountable to poor and working class people of color, and what does that work look like, and how do we learn how to be strategic in that work, right? So to build relationships, I think that I gained so many of my professional relationships through the fellowship, which has been over 12 years ago. And I actually left philanthropy for a little while and came back, and many of those relationships still existed 12 years later. And they've allowed me to kind of have more impact in my current role at the Akanadi Foundation. So I would say that the biggest takeaway is just building that professional network, really building close relationships where you can trust and rely on each other to both like learn and grow. I would say on a personal level that many of us don't come from families with a lot of professionals, or like people who work in like, you know, a foundation in this fancy land. And so we need to rely on each other to learn, like, how do I navigate this? I'm feeling intimidated. I'm feeling like I'm having imposter syndrome. Like, how do I make sure that me as a brown woman, a Latina woman from East LA, that I feel like I can take up space and be, you know, working alongside my peers, and supporting them to kind of glow and grow. So that, I'd say that. And then quickly, I'll just say what I really enjoyed about the San Francisco Foundation is like the multidisciplinary approach. I was an arts and culture fellow, but I really was happy to be working alongside peers that were interested in environmental justice, housing rights, because, you know, we're not kind of, those things are not separated in our lives. And so to work at a place that kind of is thinking about things from these different angles help to integrate my perspective on like what community change could be. I'll pass it on.
If Gracia will take the next answer.
Yeah, so I think what I would say one of the most influential takeaways from this fellowship for me was how to be your whole self at work. So we're all very well indoctrinated in white supremacy and like what you're supposed to be at work, and undoing that harm is an active everyday task that we all have to be part of. And before I came to the foundation, I was at an institution that was very white, and my confidence plummeted. You know, not even just the people, the culture. And so I was very split into who I was personally and who I was professionally. And that did damage to me and my psyche. It's dramatic. And so when I came to the foundation, and again, shout out to Claudia, who I wish couldn't be here, but totally good, totally fine, she's not. She really she picked us as a cohort. So she didn't just pick us for our pathway, she picked us for each other. And so I came into this fellowship like, oh, if I make friends, like that'll be cool, whatever, but I'm not like, it's not my priority, sorry y'all. But these people are like really good friends of mine, and I've learned so much from them. This fellowship isn't just about professional development, it's also really about personal development. And sometimes it's really painful, but it was also incredibly rewarding. And I do want to be real, right? Like we are still in a really powerful institution with hierarchy. Like this is not this is an imperfect place. And so it's important, as Heywan said, to come with a critical lens, but also with also some optimism or like some drive to like work, you know, inside outside strategy. And so I think that's one of the most influential takeaways, just being at a place where we had all this like BIPOC leadership. I had women of color to look up to, which I hadn't been in that kind of position before. And to be able to bring my whole self at work and to begin that healing. So that has been really life-changing for me.
Great, thank you so much, Grecia. And I'll definitely second everything she said. You know, with my fellowship cohort, we still have an active text thread that I get text from every day. So the bonds endure way past your time as fellows. So the next question that I want to ask to current fellows is, you know, it's philanthropy can be kind of this black box. You don't know really what happens. So what typically happens in your day-to-day at the foundation? What are some of the common things that you all do?
We smash the patriarchy every day. I'll pass to Amy.
We attend a lot of Zoom meetings. I think I can say a little bit more about the types of projects I work on. I mean, the strategic learning evaluation is really exciting for me to be in this team because we get to support the entire community impact department. So I'm working with Heywan on the people team. I'm working with the whole people team. I'm working with people in place team. I'm working with the power team also. I got to be on the Rapid Response Fund committee for some time. So that was big. That was a big part of my workload at that time. But really it's a mixture of talking to people across the departments. I talk a lot with our chief of staff and our CEO's office just on, you know, alignment and making sure that we're all driving the boat in the same direction. So that kind of looks like really a lot of discussions in my role. I also I'm on Excel. My job has a lot of Excel work in it, which is just real in our grants management system. So there's both in my role, there's both this kind of deeper tech side where we're kind of doing the data analysis, and then also the more imaginative side, where we're talking about alignment. What does alignment mean? What does it mean to embody our learnings and values?
Thanks, Amy. Any other the current fellows want to tackle that question? Maybe Josh.
I can, but yeah, just echoing what has been shared by Haywan and Amy. I think for me in particular, yeah, it's since we review Rapid Response Fund applications every week, that's a big portion of the Power Pathway fellowship role is working with the review committee and you know, setting up the review process and decision making. And yes, hella meetings overall in general.
I'll just add, we manage our own projects. Every Friday we come together as a cohort to do collective learning. We're in a lot of different meetings and then doing, I mean, I feel like the four of us spend almost like we're talking every day. And what was the third thing I was gonna say? Building relationships. So a lot of the work that we do is supporting our grantees. So we're constant conversation with what's happening on the ground, and then trying to bring that information to the foundation to further create projects and create grants and opportunities for folks.
One thing I'll add about Claudia's style is that on our Fellows Fridays, she doesn't typically give us a lot of information about what we're going to be doing. We just know Friday is Fellows Friday, and we're all for it's going to be together. We pushed her and she shares a little bit more with us, but she really pushes you to embrace ambiguity. That was really hard for me. I was like, I need an agenda, Claudia. But you know, here we are a year and a half later, and I don't really expect agendas all the time. Sometimes you just have to go into the room and be present.
Thank you. So I think the next question that I have is going to be very helpful for who knows how many applicants we'll have for this next cohort. But for current fellows, how did you decide, or what was your, I guess, thought process for deciding which pathway would best fit you, and how did you decide on applying to that particular pathway? So any advice for folks that are thinking about which pathway should I apply to would be helpful. Let's see, Grecia, do you want to tackle that one first?
Okay. Trying to think of something more thoughtful to say, like, then what interests you, right? I wouldn't go strictly off of like, what is your background? Like maybe you're coming from like, I don't know, a biology background and you're like, I'm really interested in like people power and community organizing. I want to make this shift. Like I'd say go for it. Like, what are you interested in? It does help. I know I'm being recorded. It does help to have a basic understanding though. So it's something that you're already interested in, you have some experience in. The pathways and the data evaluation fellow, like all the work is pretty distinct. And I know maybe it's not always super clear, especially with the pathways, but we're happy to like talk about it more with you, to talk about like, what are those distinctions?
It's kind of a hard question for me because it felt very clear for me going in that I was leaning towards strategic learning and evaluation. I do have experience working with some grassroots prison abolition groups and a lot of policy advocacy around education. So the people team was also something that I was considering. Ultimately, I think how I ended up going with strategic learning evaluation was that I felt the SLE work would give me a broader landscape to do this racial justice work. I'm very interested in cultural transformations. I'm very interested in embodying learnings and embodying values. So from the strategic learning evaluation team, I could be involved in a way where, you know, we had our values and each team is trying to measure their impact in alignment with those values. So for me, that was very exciting for me to have that broad range and get to be in communication with all three pathways. All three pathways, we also get to talk to the investment team. So we have like a broad perspective of the whole organization, whereas the pathways are a little bit more specific, I'd say, in their work.
I would just add, just to be that Claudia is really a magician, the way that she creates and cultivates spaces and experiences. And so even if you apply to one pathway, you may not end up there from like your interview, and, you know, there may be shuffling. So I would just encourage folks when they go into their interview, just be yourself. Like Claudia asked me in my first interview, like what are you willing to do for your people? And I just started crying because like no one has ever asked me that in a job interview. And so like as you're sharing just that, I don't know, the way I approach job interviews is like, I'm going to tell you what I bring, what I'm into, my values, my skills, and this is either going to work out or not. And so I would approach it that way. Like, this is what I want to do. Am I going to get that here? You know?
Great, thanks, fellows. So I'm going to have one last question, and I'm sure it's a burning question that a lot of folks are wondering about. With, you know, about 6 months left of your fellowship for the current fellows, what are your plans, or what are your coming plans, or what are you thinking of doing next now that you've gone through this experience?
I'm not planning on leaving the foundation, actually. I'm hoping to get a job at the San Francisco Foundation. But if I don't, then I will likely be staying in philanthropy.
I am, we're currently now transitioning into our job process, and I'm looking to do statewide national organizing work, specifically Black-led grassroots organizing, or stay in philanthropy. And my work in philanthropy really focused on educational justice, criminalization, and culture change.
I'll go next. I do want to quickly also uplift that the PLACE Fellowship is not strictly affordable housing. There's also some really rich arts and culture work that we do. It just doesn't happen to be my focus. But if that's something you're interested in, I also encourage you to look more into that. Yeah, I need a job. So that's what I'm currently looking into. I'm going to stick to affordable housing. I'm looking in different, whether that's going to be in public service or the nonprofit sector. There actually isn't a lot of people of color in affordable housing. So if that's something that interests you, I encourage you to look more into that, if you so desire.
And I'm planning to stay in the Bay Area and hopefully work for a philanthropic institution, somewhat quasi-reluctantly, but that's what I'm gonna do.
Great, thank you, Grant Fellows. I'll pass it
Can I
on
add one more thing? Sorry.
I'll go for it.
I saw the last question about food insecurity and people popping up interest. I think one of the issues in philanthropy too is just the way that issues are siloed, right? Even when we talk about people, place, power, you cannot separate people from the place they live in and how that impacts their power, right? So some of these questions people are asking, that's what you can bring to your fellowship. Like how do we actually talk about the intersections during a global pandemic? How are we talking about climate change right now, right? So there's a lot of opportunity. So if things are missing again, it's that this is that container to ideate, to dream, to scheme, and do new things. So if it doesn't exist, doesn't mean it's not going to when you're there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those last thoughts. And again, thank you also to fellows for sharing your, being authentically true to yourself and for your radical honesty. And thank you for also making yourself available for any informational interviews that people may reach out to you individually on. So you can visit the San Francisco Foundation website, and in their bios, you can find their email. So I really hope that this webinar was helpful to everyone to give you more information about the Multicultural Fellowship Program. And again, please remember these experiences are from 4 specific people during a unique time and place, and may or may not what the reality may be in the future. As we know, it's hard to expect what the future will hold, especially in this global pandemic. So please take that with a grain of salt. And thank you again for joining us. The deadline to apply is 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Sunday, February 28th. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day. Lastly, this is recorded and will be posted online. So there'll be a link that gets sent out afterwards so that you can link to the recording. Take care, everyone.